My name is Emily Clark, and I'm 32 years old. 8 months ago, my world collapsed when I lost my biomedical engineering job. My husband David, my partner of 8 years, looked me in the eyes at a dinner party and called me useless. What he didn't know was that I'd been privately developing a medical device. While he belittled me, I was finalizing a patent that would change everything. 2 months later, I sold it for $97 million, but that was just the beginning of what I discovered. If you're going through something similar, stick around. Before I continue, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear how I reclaimed my worth and uncovered the shocking truth about my marriage. Before everything fell apart, I had what most would consider the perfect life. I graduated at the top of my class from Northwestern University in Evanston, just outside Chicago, with a degree in biomedical engineering. My professors always said I had a brilliant mind, particularly when it came to innovative medical technologies. I was the student they predicted would change the world someday. I met David at a biotechnology conference in Chicago's McCormick Place. I was presenting my research on minimally invasive surgical tools, and he was there representing his marketing firm that specialized in tech companies. He approached me. After my presentation, his green eyes sparkling with interest, not just in my research, but in me. He was handsome, charming, and seemed genuinely fascinated by my work. "Your presentation was incredible," he told me. "The way you think about solving medical problems is revolutionary." We exchanged numbers, and within a week, we were having dinner at an upscale restaurant overlooking Lake Michigan. David was attentive, asking thoughtful questions about my research and career goals. He shared stories about his work in marketing, how he helped tech companies bring their innovations to the world. Our conversation flowed effortlessly until the restaurant closed, and we found ourselves walking along the lakefront trail, reluctant to end the night. Our relationship progressed quickly. Within 6 months, we were inseparable. David was everything I thought I wanted in a partner: successful, supportive of my career, and we shared similar goals about building a life together. When he proposed a year later during a weekend trip to Door County, Wisconsin, I didn't hesitate to say yes. After a beautiful but modest wedding, we both agreed to save for a house instead of an extravagant ceremony. We settled into married life. I landed a prestigious position at Biotech Innovations, one of the leading medical research companies in Chicago's growing biotech corridor. David's marketing career also took off, and he became an executive at Horizon Marketing, a major player in the technology marketing space. We bought a beautiful brownstone in Lincoln Park, with enough rooms for the children we planned to have, and a perfect space for my home office. Every Sunday, we'd have brunch at a local cafe on Clark Street, planning our future together. We talked about having 2 children, traveling the world, and eventually retiring to a lake house in Wisconsin. Life seemed perfect. My career at Biotech Innovations was thriving. I led a team developing new surgical tools, and my supervisors frequently praised my innovative thinking. I worked long hours, often coming home well after dinner time, navigating Chicago's bustling traffic. But David seemed to understand my dedication to my work. At least, that's what I thought at the time. What David didn't know was that I had been working on a side project for years. In my home office late at night and on weekends, I was developing a revolutionary, minimally invasive device for cardiac surgeries. The idea had come to me during my graduate studies, but I hadn't had the resources or time to fully develop it until now. I kept it to myself, not because I wanted to hide it from David, but because I wanted to be sure it was viable before sharing it. I also wanted it to be mine, something I created independently. Looking back, there were small signs of trouble I chose to ignore. When I'd share successes at work, David would sometimes make comments like, "That's great, honey, but remember, who covers most of our mortgage?" It was said with a smile, as if it were a joke, but it always left me feeling slightly diminished. Then there was the way he'd question my spending, even though we maintained separate accounts and I was financially responsible. "Another pair of shoes?" he'd ask, eyebrows raised, when in reality, they were my first new pair in over a year. My best friend Sarah noticed these red flags before I did. During our monthly coffee dates at a cozy cafe in Wicker Park, she would carefully ask questions about my relationship. "Does David support your career, Emily?" "Really support it?" she asked once. "Of course," I replied quickly. "He's always encouraging me." She said, stirring her latte. "It's just that sometimes the way you describe his reaction seems a bit controlling." I dismissed her concerns. "He just likes to be involved in decisions. We're a team." But were we? I maintained our home, cooked most meals, and managed our social calendar, all while working 50 to 60-hour weeks. David expected our house to be spotless, meals to be homemade, and me to be present at all his company functions, looking perfect on his arm. When I pointed out the imbalance, he'd remind me that his job paid more, so my career was technically less important to our financial stability. Still, I was happy enough. I loved my work at Biotech Innovations, and I was making significant progress on my cardiac device. Life was busy but fulfilling. Then came the first rumors of trouble at Biotech Innovations. The biotech industry was facing an economic downturn, and investors were becoming cautious. Our company had recently invested heavily in a new research facility in Chicago's Fulton Market District, and rumors of budget cuts began circulating. I wasn't worried initially. My department was generating promising results, and I was considered a valuable asset to the company. How wrong I was to feel secure. How wrong I was about so many things. The economic downturn hit the biotech industry like a tsunami. Companies that had seemed untouchable began announcing layoffs and restructuring. Still, at Biotech Innovations, we believed our innovative pipeline and strong investor relationships would shield us from the worst of it. That belief shattered on a chilly Tuesday morning when our CEO called an emergency all-hands meeting. With a grim expression, he announced that the company needed to reduce its workforce by 30% to remain viable. The entire room fell silent, hundreds of brilliant minds suddenly facing uncertainty. "Departments will be notified throughout the day," he said, his voice echoing in the stunned silence. "This is not a reflection on your work or dedication. These are purely financial decisions. In response to market conditions." I returned to my lab, trying to focus on my current project while anxiety gnawed at my stomach. As the head of my research team, I thought I would at least be involved in the decisions about my department. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was Karen from Human Resources, asking me to come to her office. The walk to HR felt like marching to an execution. Karen's sympathetic expression when I entered confirmed my fears before she spoke a word. "Emily, I'm so sorry," she began, sliding a folder across her desk. "Your position has been eliminated, effective immediately. But my research project is in its critical phase." I protested, my voice tight with disbelief. "We're so close to a breakthrough." "The decision came from above," Karen explained. "They're cutting entire research tracks, including yours. It's not performance related." I sat there, stunned, as she explained my severance package and the process for returning company property. 7 years of dedication ended in a 15-minute meeting. I was given a box for my personal items and escorted out of the building by security. A standard procedure that felt unnecessarily humiliating. Sitting in my car in the parking lot, I allowed myself 5 minutes of tears before pulling myself together. This was a setback, not the end of my career. With my credentials and experience, I'd find another position quickly. I called David, hoping for comfort and reassurance. "I got laid off," I said when he answered, my voice still shaky. "What? How's that possible?" His tone was more surprised than supportive. "Budget cuts. They eliminated my entire research track. Come home," he said after a pause. "We'll figure it out." When I arrived home, David had ordered takeout from our favorite deep dish pizza place and opened a bottle of wine. His initial response was what I needed. He listened as I processed the shock, assured me that we were financially stable enough to weather this, and reminded me of my accomplishments. "You're brilliant, Emily," he said, refilling my wine glass. "Any company would be lucky to have you." That supportive attitude lasted approximately 3 days. By the end of the first week, David began making subtle comments. "Have you updated your resume yet?" Or, "Did you check the job boards today?" Each question came with an underlying tone of impatience. I was applying to positions daily, reaching out to my professional network, and even considering relocating if necessary. But the biotech industry's downturn wasn't limited to biotech innovations. Labs across the country were freezing hiring or downsizing. As days turned into weeks, David's attitude grew increasingly cold. He started coming home later, claiming work demands, and our dinner conversations became interrogations about my job search. "I applied to 14 positions today," I would tell him. "Any responses?" he'd ask, barely looking up from his plate. "Not yet. These things take time. We can't afford for it to take too much time, Emily," he'd say heavily. The truth was, we could afford it. My severance package was generous, and we had substantial savings. David's salary alone could cover our expenses. The financial pressure he implied was more about his expectations than our actual needs. As the tension in our home increased, I found solace in my private project. I dedicated more time to perfecting my cardiac device patent application, while David thought I was job searching all day, which I was for several hours. I was also making significant progress on my invention. 1 month after losing my job, I had my first glimmer of hope when a prestigious research hospital in Chicago showed interest in my resume. After 2 promising interviews, they ultimately went with an internal candidate. This rejection hit harder than others because it had seemed so promising. That night, David found me at the kitchen table, staring at my laptop. "Another rejection?" he asked, loosening his tie. I nodded, fighting back tears. "Maybe you should lower your standards," he suggested. "Apply for lab technician positions or something teaching related. I'm a senior researcher with multiple published papers," I said, stunned by his suggestion. I'd be throwing away years of career building. "Well, being unemployed isn't building your career either," he snapped. "At least, a lesser position would bring in some income." That comment stung like a slap. "I'm not just sitting around, David, I'm trying." "Are you?" Because from where I stand, it looks like you're being too picky. Meanwhile, I'm carrying all the financial weight. I went to bed that night, feeling worthless for the first time in my life. David's words echoed in my head. Carrying all the financial weight, as if my contributions to our marriage were solely measured by my income. The following weeks brought increasing anxiety as my professional confidence eroded under David's constant criticism. I began having trouble sleeping, often lying awake, replaying job interviews in my mind, wondering what I could have said differently. During the day, I'd jump whenever my phone rang, hoping for good news from one of my applications. David's behavior grew more controlling as my unemployment continued. He began checking the grocery receipts, questioning purchases, and suggesting we cut back on unnecessary expenses, which mainly seemed to be things I enjoyed. "Do you really need that coffee subscription?" he asked one morning. "It's $8 a pound when you could get something basic for half that." These weren't financial necessities. They were power moves. With each passing day, I felt more like a dependent than a partner. The dynamic of our marriage was shifting beneath my feet, and I was struggling to find solid ground. Despite this growing strain, I continued refining my cardiac device design. Working on it became my refuge, the one place where I still felt competent and valuable. I was making significant progress, but kept this from David, who had begun referring to my home office time as pretending to job search. The growing financial strain wasn't just in David's imagination. Our savings were indeed decreasing, though not at a crisis level. Still, I felt the pressure to contribute financially, which only added to my stress during interviews. What I didn't know then was that the worst was yet to come, and that rock bottom would actually be the foundation upon which I would rebuild my life. 6 weeks into my unemployment, David announced we were attending a dinner party hosted by his boss, Richard, at his home in Evanston. Under normal circumstances, I would have looked forward to the event. Richard and his wife, Laura, were pleasant company, and these gatherings were usually enjoyable, often filled with Chicago's vibrant mix of professionals. But given my employment situation and David's increasingly critical attitude, I was filled with dread. "Do we have to go?" I asked, sitting at our kitchen island while David made coffee. "I'm not really in the mood for small talk." David's expression hardened. "It's not optional, Emily. Richard specifically asked if you'd be there. Besides, networking might help your job situation." I doubted that marketing executives would have connections in biomedical engineering, but I kept that thought to myself. "What should I wear?" "Something professional," he said, giving me a once-over that made me feel inadequate in my casual weekend clothes. "You need to look successful, even if you're not right now." That comment hurt, but I swallowed my response. I spent the afternoon preparing myself mentally for the inevitable questions about my career, and selected a navy cocktail dress that had always made me feel confident. When we arrived at Richard's elegant home in Evanston, the party was already in full swing. Conversations hummed throughout the open concept first floor, punctuated by occasional laughter and the clink of glasses. David immediately transformed into his public persona, charming, attentive, the perfect husband. "There you are." Richard greeted us, holding a glass of bourbon. "Emily, wonderful to see you. David tells me you're between opportunities right now." I forced a smile. Yes, biotech innovations had major cutbacks. I'm exploring options. "She's being selective," David added with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Only the best for my brilliant wife." The first hour wasn't as bad as I'd feared. Most people were tactful about my situation, and a few offered genuine connections that might be helpful, especially within Chicago's tight-knit biotech community. I began to relax slightly, thinking the evening might be salvageable. During dinner, I was seated between Richard and another executive named Mark. The conversation flowed pleasantly, with talk of Chicago's tech scene and the city's harsh winters, until Mark asked about my career prospects. "Any promising leads?" he inquired between bites of steak. "A few," I answered honestly. "The industry is tight right now, but I'm optimistic." David, seated across from me, interjected. "Emily's been job hunting for 6 weeks now. Nothing substantial yet." The way he emphasized nothing made my cheeks burn. The right opportunity takes time, I said, trying to maintain my dignity. Meanwhile, David continued as if I hadn't spoken. I'm keeping us afloat. One income instead of two means some adjustments. Mark nodded sympathetically. It must be stressful. It is, David agreed, taking a long sip of wine. Especially when you're used to your partner contributing equally. The table grew quieter, and I felt several pairs of eyes on me. I'm contributing in other ways, I said quietly. And this is temporary. David laughed, a sharp sound devoid of humor. Right, like keeping the house clean. Even that's slipping lately. Richard's wife, Laura, intervened. David, come now. Job transitions are difficult for anyone. But David was on a roll, his filter dissolved by wine and an audience. You know what's difficult? Coming home to a wife who's been home all day, but still hasn't managed to prepare dinner or tidy up. It's like living with a roommate who doesn't pay rent. The table fell silent. My hands trembled beneath the tablecloth. At least a roommate would be useful, he continued, oblivious to the discomfort around him. Right now, she's just useless. The word hung in the air like a slap. Useless. In that moment, something inside me shattered. I'd been called many things in my life. Stubborn, workaholic, perfectionist, but never useless, never worthless. I placed my napkin beside my half-eaten meal. Excuse me, I managed to say, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the hurricane of emotions inside me. I need some air. I walked calmly to the patio, closing the door behind me, before allowing the tears to fall. The cool Chicago night, air did nothing to soothe the burning humiliation I felt. Through the glass doors, I could see Laura speaking intensely to David, her expression disapproving. Other guests looked uncomfortable, focusing too intently on their meals. 10 minutes later, David joined me outside. You're overreacting, he said, without preamble. It was a joke. A joke? I turned to face him, no longer hiding. My tears. You called me useless in front of your colleagues and their spouses. How is that funny? You're being too sensitive, he insisted. Everyone knows the job market is tough right now. This isn't about the job market, David. This is about you publicly humiliating me. His expression hardened. Let's not make a scene. We'll discuss this at home. The ride home was silent and suffocating. With the city skyline fading behind us, David turned the radio on, perhaps to avoid conversation, while I stared out the window, replaying his words. Useless. The term echoed in my mind, each repetition another crack in the foundation of our marriage. At home, I thought we might talk calmly, that David might apologize. Once he realized how deeply he'd hurt me. Instead, he went straight to the liquor cabinet and poured himself a whiskey. Are we going to discuss what happened? I asked, standing in the doorway of our living room. What's to discuss? You embarrassed me by walking out. I embarrassed you. My voice rose despite my effort to stay calm. You called me useless in front of everyone we know. Well, what would you call it? He shot back. You don't have a job. You barely keep the house in order, and you spend hours locked in your office doing God knows what. What exactly are you contributing right now, Emily? Each word was a dagger. I'm your wife, not your employee. My value isn't measured by a paycheck. He laughed. That same humorless laugh from dinner. That's convenient, isn't it? To claim your value is in some intangible quality when you're not pulling your weight, pulling my weight. I supported you through 2 career changes. I paid most of our expenses while you found your footing in marketing. I never once made you feel less than. That was different. He dismissed. Those were strategic moves that paid off. What you're doing is failing. I'm not failing, I insisted, tears streaming again. I'm navigating a difficult industry situation. that is beyond my control. Whatever helps you sleep at night, he said, finishing his whiskey. But from where I stand, I married an accomplished woman, and now I'm living with a parasite. Parasite. The word hit harder than useless had. I stared at this man, my husband of 8 years, and suddenly saw a stranger. I think we should sleep separately tonight, I said, my voice trembling. Fine by me, he replied, pouring another drink. The guest room is all yours. I spent that night in our guest room, crying until there were no tears left. Around 3 a.m., a strange calm settled over me. Lying in the dark, I had a moment of complete clarity. David didn't love me. He loved what I provided: status, accomplishment, a trophy to display. When my external success faltered, so did his affection. That realization was both devastating and liberating. The pain was excruciating, but the clarity was a gift. In that moment, I decided 2 things. I would never allow anyone to make me feel worthless again, and I would pour everything I had into completing my patent. Morning came, and with it a new resolve. While David slept, I made coffee and sat at our kitchen counter, planning my next steps. When he finally emerged, looking slightly remorseful, I was already dressed and working on my laptop. Emily, about last night, he began, his tone softening. I was drunk and frustrated. I didn't mean what I said. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the manipulation for what it was. He wasn't sorry for what he'd said. He was sorry I wasn't playing my expected role anymore. I think we both said things we needed to say, I replied calmly. It clarified some things for me. He looked uncertain, not getting the forgiveness he expected. So, we're okay. I'm okay, I answered truthfully. I'm going to focus on my career now, and I'd appreciate some space to do that. David nodded, seemingly relieved to avoid further conflict. He didn't know that my career focus wasn't just about finding a new job. It was about creating my own path forward, one that wouldn't depend on his approval or anyone else's. That morning marked the beginning of my transformation, from David's useless wife to the architect of my own destiny. The breaking point had come, and surprisingly, breaking was exactly what I needed to rebuild myself stronger than before. With newfound determination, I immersed myself in finalizing my cardiac device patent. What David dismissively called my hobby was actually a revolutionary, minimally invasive tool for heart valve repairs. The concept had come to me during my second year at Biotech Innovations, when I observed surgeons struggling with existing instruments during a particularly challenging procedure at a Chicago hospital. The device I designed would allow surgeons to repair heart valves through a small incision, drastically reducing recovery time and complications. Traditional methods required opening the chest cavity completely, but my tool worked through an incision smaller than a dime, using advanced imaging and precision controls. For 3 years, I had been refining the design in my spare time, conducting literature reviews, creating prototypes, and addressing potential flaws. I'd invested a significant portion of my personal savings into preliminary materials testing, working with a small fabrication lab in Chicago's West Loop that signed strict confidentiality agreements. The device was nearly ready for patent filing before I lost my job, but now I could dedicate uninterrupted time to perfecting it. Each morning after David left for work, I transformed our guest room into a makeshift engineering lab. I spread my technical drawings across the bed, ran simulations on my laptop, and made calls to industry contacts who might offer insights without knowing the full scope of my project. 2 weeks after the dinner party incident, I felt confident enough to approach a patent attorney using my personal savings. I scheduled a consultation with Susan Harper, a specialist in medical device patents based in Chicago's Loop. "This is remarkable, Emily," Susan said during our first meeting, studying my technical specifications. "Have you considered its market potential?" "I've been focused on the technical aspects," I admitted. "Market value is secondary." Susan smiled knowingly. "Based on my experience, a device with this potential impact could be extremely valuable, especially in Chicago's competitive biotech market. Have you disclosed this to anyone?" "No," I answered. "Not even my husband knows the details." She nodded approvingly. "Good. Let's keep it that way until we file." Medical device companies would pay handsomely for this innovation. Susan helped me refine my patent application, strengthening the claims and ensuring comprehensive protection. The filing fee depleted most of my remaining personal savings, but I considered it an investment in my future. At home, David had settled into a cold détente. He no longer criticized me openly, but made his disapproval known through subtle jabs and prolonged silences. When he asked about my day, I gave vague answers about job applications and networking, never mentioning the patent progress. "Still, playing with your little project?" he asked one evening, finding me at my desk surrounded by technical journals. "Just keeping my skills sharp," I replied neutrally. He shrugged. "Whatever makes you feel productive. Just don't forget to submit those job applications to the companies I suggested." The companies he'd suggested were all entry-level, positions far below my qualifications, but I nodded anyway. Arguing would waste energy I needed elsewhere. 3 weeks after filing the patent, Susan called with exciting news. "Emily, I have someone you need to meet," she said, her voice vibrating with contained excitement. "A venture capitalist specializing in medical innovations, based right here in Chicago. He's interested in your device." The meeting was arranged at Susan's office in the Loop. Michael Thompson, a sharply dressed man with a direct manner, listened intently as I explained my device's function and potential impact. "What's your asking price?" he asked when I finished. I glanced at Susan, unprepared for such a direct approach. "Emily isn't necessarily looking to sell outright," Susan interjected smoothly. "Perhaps an investment arrangement would be more appropriate." Michael nodded. "Fair enough, but keep in mind, Cardiotech Solutions has been searching for exactly this kind of innovation. They might offer purchase terms too attractive to refuse." That evening, I sat in my car outside our brownstone, processing the meeting. For the first time, I realized my hobby might not just validate my professional worth. It could potentially change our financial future. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. As the weeks progressed, interest in my device grew. Susan arranged a meeting with Dr. Elizabeth Carter, a leading cardiac surgeon at Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago. "I've been waiting for something like this for years," Dr. Carter said after reviewing my designs. "Current methods are effective but invasive. Your device could transform recovery outcomes for patients across the Midwest." Her validation was worth more than any financial offer. Here was a renowned surgeon confirming what I had believed all along. My idea could make a real difference in patients' lives. Meanwhile, Cardiotech Solutions had entered the picture more formally. Their research director, Dr. Robert Lee, requested a demonstration using the prototype I'd developed. "The precision is impressive," he remarked, manipulating the device's controls. "Our surgical consultants will want to test this thoroughly, but initial impressions are very positive." As these developments unfolded, I maintained an outward appearance of normality at home. David remained unaware of the growing interest in my invention, still treating my office time as wasteful. His verbal abuse had evolved into something more insidious, a constant undermining of my confidence through subtle comments and dismissive gestures. Another day without an interview, he would ask, knowing the answer. The industry is still recovering. I would reply, choosing not to mention that I'd declined 2 interviews to meet with cardiotech representatives. During this period, my friendship with Sarah became my emotional lifeline. We met for coffee weekly at a cafe in Logan Square, and I gradually revealed what was happening, both with David and my patent. "Emily, this is incredible," she said when I told her about cardiotech's interest. "But I'm worried about you keeping this from David. Not because he deserves to know, but because of how he might react when he finds out." Her concern was valid. David's controlling nature had intensified during my unemployment. He checked our bank statements meticulously, questioned every purchase, and had recently suggested I temporarily add him to my personal account for simplicity. "I'm being careful," I assured her. "Susan is handling everything through her office. No paperwork comes to the house." "That's not what I mean," Sarah said, reaching for my hand. "Emily, when was the last time you were truly happy at home?" The question caught me off guard. When had I last felt happy with David? Before the layoff, certainly, but even then, there had been moments of tension, of feeling diminished. Had I been ignoring red flags for years? "I don't know," I admitted quietly. Sarah squeezed my hand. "Whatever happens with this patent, maybe it's time to think about what you want your life to look like afterward." Her words stayed with me, planting a seed that would grow alongside my professional plans. 2 months after filing the patent, Susan arranged a formal meeting at Cardiotech's headquarters in Chicago's Illinois Medical District. Dr. Lee and the company CEO, Jennifer Patel, presented their initial evaluation. "We've completed our preliminary assessment," Jennifer began, her poised demeanor radiating confidence. "Our surgical team believes your device represents a significant advancement in minimally invasive cardiac procedures." Dr. Lee nodded in agreement. The potential reduction in recovery time alone would transform patient outcomes, not to mention the decreased risk of complications. Jennifer slid a folder across the table. "We'd like to make an offer for exclusive rights to your patent." I opened the folder and my breath caught. The number typed neatly on the official letterhead was 97 million. "Take some time to consider," Jennifer said, correctly interpreting my shocked expression. "This includes milestone payments based on regulatory approvals and market performance." "We'll review the terms carefully," Susan replied, professionally, while I struggled to maintain my composure. In my car afterward, parked along Michigan Avenue, I finally allowed myself to react, laughing and crying simultaneously. 97 million. The validation was sweet, but the freedom this represented was intoxicating. For the first time since losing my job, I felt completely in control of my future. That night, I lay awake beside David, our backs turned to each other, as had become our habit. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who had called me useless was sleeping next to someone whose idea was worth 97 million. But money wasn't the point. The point was that I had created something valuable while being told I had no value. In that moment, I made my decision about both the patent and my marriage. One chapter of my life was ending, but another, more authentic one was about to begin. The morning after receiving Cardiotech's offer, I called Susan from my car, parked several blocks from home in a quiet corner of Lincoln Park. "I want to accept their offer," I told her, my decision firm. "But I need your help with something else first." "What do you need?" she asked. "I need to ensure the proceeds are protected," I explained. "I'm considering ending my marriage." There was a brief silence before Susan responded. I understand. I'll put you in touch with a family law attorney immediately. Don't sign anything from Cardiotech until you've spoken with them. That afternoon, I met with Rachel Cohen, a divorce attorney Susan recommended, in her office overlooking the Chicago River. I explained my situation, including David's behavior and the pending patent sale. Timing is critical here, Rachel advised. Illinois is an equitable distribution state. While the court might not split the patent proceeds, 50-50, your husband could make a claim for a portion, especially if you developed it during your marriage. What do you recommend? I asked, taking notes. First, open a separate bank account at a different bank, one where you don't have joint accounts, Rachel instructed. Second, gather documentation showing your independent development of this patent, receipts for materials, dated research notes, communications with professionals. Third, document any instances of emotional abuse. Illinois recognizes economics abuse as a form of domestic violence. I left Rachel's office with a clear action plan. That same day, I opened an account at a credit union in Evanston and began compiling evidence of my independent work on the patent. I also started documenting David's behavior, noting dates, times, and specific comments that constituted emotional and economic abuse. Meanwhile, Susan negotiated final terms with Cardiotech. The company was eager to close the deal quickly, but Susan insisted on thorough due diligence, buying me time to prepare my exit strategy. 2 weeks later, everything was in place. The final contracts with Cardiotech were ready, and Rachel had prepared preliminary divorce paperwork. I had secured a temporary place to stay at Sarah's apartment in Wicker Park, packed essential items in my car during David's working hours, and arranged for the rest to be moved once I was settled. The signing day at Cardiotech arrived on a crisp autumn morning. In Jennifer Patel's sleek office, I signed the final documents, transferring my patent rights in exchange for $97 million, with an initial payment of $60 million and the remainder tied to development milestones. Congratulations, Emily, Jennifer said, shaking my hand. This technology will change countless lives. That's always been the goal, I replied, feeling a profound sense of validation. Susan accompanied me to the credit union afterward, where we confirmed the initial transfer to my new account. Seeing the balance on the screen, $60 million was surreal, not for its magnitude, but for what it represented. Freedom. What? Now? Susan asked as we left the bank. Now I go home one last time, I answered. I returned to our brownstone mid-afternoon, knowing David wouldn't be home for hours. I walked through each room, saying goodbye to the life I had built and the dreams I had invested in this space. In our bedroom, I packed the remaining personal items I couldn't bear to leave behind. My mother's locket, photo albums from before David, and the notebook containing my earliest sketches of the cardiac device. In the kitchen, I wrote David a letter explaining that I was leaving. I didn't mention the patent sale, only that I needed to remove myself from what had become a toxic environment. I stated that divorce papers would be delivered in the coming days and asked him to respect my decision by not attempting to contact me directly. As I placed the letter on the counter where he would find it, I removed my wedding ring and set it beside the note. The simple gold band had once symbolized partnership and mutual support. Now, it represented a painful lesson in seeing people for who they truly are, not who we wish them to be. I took one final look around the home we had shared, acknowledging both the happy memories and the gradual erosion of respect that had led to this moment. Then, I walked out the door, got into my car, where my essential belongings were packed, and drove away from 8 years of my life. Sarah was waiting at her apartment, ready with a comforting hug and a glass of wine. "How do you feel?" she asked as we sat in her cozy living room. "Lighter," I answered truthfully. "Scared, but lighter." That evening, David called, repeatedly once he found my letter. I let the calls go to voicemail. Listening to his messages evolved from confusion to anger to pleading. His final message of the night was telling. "Emily, you can't just throw away 8 years. We can work through this. I said some things I regret, but walking away is extreme. Please come home so we can talk about this rationally." Not once did he apologize specifically for calling me useless or treating me like a burden. Not once did he acknowledge the emotional toll his behavior had taken. His concern was for what he was losing, not for the pain he had caused. The next morning, I met with Rachel to formally file for divorce. As we reviewed the paperwork, my phone buzzed with text messages from David, alternating between accusations and appeals to emotion. "This is typical," Rachel noted, glancing at my phone. "Once he's served with papers, we can request a temporary order preventing direct contact if the messages become harassing." "I just want this to be over cleanly," I said, signing the petition. "With your documentation and the evidence of emotional abuse, we have a strong case for a favorable settlement," Rachel assured me. "The fact that you've separated your finances before disclosing the patent sale strengthens our position." As I left her office, I felt a strange mix of sadness and determination. I hadn't wanted my marriage to end this way, but I refused to remain in a relationship where my worth was measured by my paycheck or utility to someone else. For the next week, I stayed at Sarah's, gradually adjusting to my new reality. I began researching properties in different Chicago neighborhoods, considering where I might want to rebuild my life, perhaps closer to the vibrant energy of the Loop or the artistic vibe of Pilsen. I also spoke with a financial advisor about managing my newfound wealth responsibly, setting up philanthropic goals, and potentially establishing my own research foundation. Throughout this transition, David's messages continued, growing increasingly desperate as he realized I was serious about ending our marriage. Then, 1 week after I left, he was served with divorce papers at his office. His response was immediate and furious. Within hours, his attorney contacted Rachel, demanding an emergency hearing and freezing of assets. When they discovered my new account with the patent proceeds, the tone of their legal communication shifted dramatically. David wanted half of everything, especially the patent money. The stage was set for what would become not just the end of a marriage, but the revelation of truths I never could have imagined. The day after David was served divorce papers, my phone exploded with notifications, 27 missed calls, 15 voicemails, and 38 text messages, all from David. His messages ranged from bewildered, "What is happening?" "Talk to me," to enraged, "You sneaky bitch, you planned this all along," to pleading, "Baby, please, we can fix this. I love you." Following Rachel's advice, I didn't respond directly. Instead, I forwarded the messages to her as evidence of David's escalating behavior. She immediately filed for a communication restriction, limiting David to contact through legal channels only. 3 days later, David's attorney, Stephen Grant, requested an emergency financial disclosure hearing. Rachel had anticipated this move. They found out about the cardiotech deal. She informed me during our preparation meeting. Based on their filing, David is claiming the patent was developed during your marriage, using joint resources, and therefore he's entitled to half the proceeds. That's not accurate, I replied, pulling out my documentation. I used my personal savings account for all development costs. I have receipts, contracts with the fabrication lab, everything. Rachel smiled. Perfect. And your development. Notes date back to when? My initial concept sketches are from graduate school, before I even met David. The detailed development began 3 years ago, all done on my personal time. Oh, excellent. We'll use all of that. Also, David's behavior after you left helps our case for emotional abuse. The judge will see a pattern consistent with financial control and emotional manipulation. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. Meanwhile, I continued rebuilding my life. I found a furnished apartment with excellent security in the West Loop, set up meetings with research institutions interested in collaboration, and began the emotional healing process with a therapist specializing in emotional abuse recovery. What I didn't expect was the outpouring of support from former colleagues. Word had spread about my patent sale, and several researchers from Biotech Innovations reached out with congratulations and, surprisingly, job offers from their new companies. I politely declined employment, but began discussing potential research. Partnerships. Then came a message that changed everything. Karen from HR at Biotech Innovations asked to meet privately, saying she had information I should know regarding my layoff. Curious and slightly apprehensive, I agreed to coffee at a quiet cafe in Andersonville. Emily, I've been troubled by something since your departure. Karen began, nervously stirring her latte. Your layoff wasn't just about budget. Cuts. I leaned forward. What do you mean? About a month before the reductions, someone contacted your department head with concerns about your research ethics. She explained. They suggested you were falsifying data and stealing company resources for personal projects. My blood ran cold. That's absolutely false. Who would say that? Karen hesitated. The allegations came through your husband, David. He told your supervisor you'd been behaving erratically, that you were under tremendous stress and making poor decisions. He expressed concern that your mental health was affecting your work. I sat back, stunned. David had sabotaged my career. The timeline aligned perfectly. His comments had begun around the time I started staying late to finalize some research, often missing his company events. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because it wasn't right, Karen said firmly. HR investigated the claims discreetly and found nothing to substantiate them. But when layoffs became necessary, your name was added to the list because of the lingering questions. I've been bothered by it ever since, especially after hearing about your patent success. I thanked Karen for her honesty and immediately called Rachel to share this revelation. She was as shocked as I was. This is significant, she said. It demonstrates a pattern of sabotage and control that predates your decision to leave. We need Karen's testimony. The day of the financial hearing arrived. Sitting across from David in the conference room was surreal. He looked thinner, with dark circles under his eyes, but his expression was cold and calculating. His attorney presented their case first, arguing that as my spouse, David had supported my career and indirectly contributed to the patent's development through emotional and financial support. When it was our turn, Rachel methodically dismantled their argument. She presented my detailed records, showing personal funding of all patent-related expenses. She introduced emails from the fabrication lab, confirming my independent contract. Most devastatingly, she called Karen as a witness, who testified about David's deliberate undermining of my position at Biotech Innovations. David's face paled. As Karen recounted his calls to my supervisor, his attorney attempted to object, but the judge allowed the testimony as relevant to the pattern of behavior in the marriage. During a brief recess, David cornered me in the hallway, his lawyer momentarily absent. "Why are you doing this?" he hissed. "We had a good life together." "Did we?" I countered. Or did you have a trophy wife who boosted your ego until she became inconvenient? That's not fair. He protested. I supported. You sabotaged my career, David. You called me useless when I was developing something worth $97 million. You never saw me. You only saw what I could do for you. His expression hardened. You're going to regret this. I know things about you that would ruin your reputation. Before I could respond, Rachel appeared, firmly separating us and documenting his threat. When the hearing resumed, we introduced our final piece of evidence, records subpoenaed from David's bank showing large transfers to an account belonging to someone named Megan Foster, his assistant at work. The transfers had begun 6 months before my layoff and continued with increasing frequency. Your Honor, Rachel stated calmly, these records indicate Mr. Clark has been diverting marital assets to support an extramarital relationship while simultaneously undermining my client's career and emotional well-being. David's attorney requested another recess, during which he and David had an intense discussion in the corner of the conference room. When they returned, their demeanor had changed. My client is willing to discuss settlement terms, the attorney announced. The judge ordered us to attempt mediation before returning. In a separate conference room, David's attorney proposed that David would drop all claims to the patent proceeds in exchange for keeping the brownstone and his retirement accounts intact. And one more thing, I added, a public retraction of any negative statements he's made about me professionally, and an agreement not to make any in the future. David glared, but eventually nodded. By the end of the day, we had a preliminary agreement. The divorce would proceed with David receiving none of the patent proceeds, keeping our brownstone, which I no longer wanted, and his own retirement accounts. In exchange, I kept my patent money, personal accounts, and received a commitment that he would not disparage me professionally. As we left the courthouse, David made one last attempt. You know this wouldn't have happened if you just found another job, he said bitterly. I looked at him, this man I had once loved, and felt nothing but pity. No, David. This happened because you thought my value as a person was tied to my usefulness to you. That was always going to fail. In the weeks that followed, I discovered the full extent of David's betrayal. Through mutual friends, I learned his affair with Megan had begun over a year earlier. He had been systematically withdrawing money from our joint savings to fund weekends away with her, gifts, and eventually a secret apartment in the South Loop. Most revealing was finding old emails where David had complained to friends about my late work hours, saying they interfered with his social plans. In one message, he wrote, Emily's career is becoming a problem. She's too independent, too focused on her work. Sometimes I think a setback would remind her what's really important. He had wanted me to fail. My success and independence threatened him, so he had methodically worked to undermine both. The realization was painful, but clarifying. I hadn't failed our marriage. I had outgrown it, and David couldn't handle that reality. As the divorce proceeded, David launched a subtle campaign to salvage his reputation. He told friends I had hidden money, that I was mentally unstable, that I had cheated on him. Few believed him, especially as the truth about his affair with Megan became widely known. My former colleagues, now understanding the true circumstances of my departure from biotech innovations, reached out with support and collaboration offers. Several confessed they'd received strange calls from David over the years, subtly undermining my work or suggesting I was struggling with the pressure. The pattern was clear. While I had been building a career and developing innovations, David had been actively working to keep me dependent on him, to diminish my confidence, and to ensure I remained useful according to his definition. That knowledge, painful as it was, became the final piece in my healing journey. The problem had never been my worth. It had been David's inability to value anything he couldn't control. 6 months after leaving David, our divorce was finalized. The proceedings ended, much as they had begun, with David receiving none of the patent proceeds and agreeing to a non-disparagement clause. I felt neither victory nor defeat, only relief that this chapter was closing. With the legal battles behind me, I could finally focus on rebuilding. My first decision was location. I needed a fresh start away from Chicago and its memories. After considering several options, I chose San Diego, California, drawn by its vibrant biotech community and sunny, laid-back lifestyle. Using a portion of the patent proceeds, I purchased a beautiful home in La Jolla with ocean views. The light-filled rooms and open spaces were the antithesis of the traditional brownstone I had shared with David. This home was entirely mine, designed for my comfort and reflecting my aesthetic preferences. As I settled into my new surroundings, I established the Clark Medical Innovation Foundation with a $40 million endowment. The foundation's mission was twofold: funding promising medical device research and providing grants to women in STEM fields facing career obstacles. My first executive decision was hiring 3 researchers from Biotech Innovations who had been laid off during the same cuts that had affected me. Dr. Maria Lopez, Dr. James Kim, and Dr. Rachel Stein. They had all been brilliant colleagues whose projects were terminated prematurely. Now they had fully funded positions, continuing their important work. "I still can't believe this opportunity," Maria told me during our first official foundation meeting. When Biotech Innovations cut our department, I thought my research was dead. "I know exactly how that feels," I replied. "That's why this foundation exists, to prevent valuable innovations from being lost to corporate decisions." Beyond professional rebuilding, I focused on personal healing. I found a therapist specializing in recovery from emotionally abusive relationships. Dr. Laura Bennett helped me recognize patterns I had normalized and rebuild boundaries I had allowed to erode. "The most common question I hear from patients like you," Dr. Bennett said during one session, is, "How did I not see it?" The answer is that abuse rarely starts dramatically. It's incremental, with each small boundary violation making the next one easier to accept. Those words resonated deeply. David's control hadn't appeared overnight. It had developed gradually, each criticism or undermining comment paving the way for the next. Understanding this process was crucial to ensuring I wouldn't repeat the pattern. I also reconnected with family members David had subtly isolated me from over the years. My sister, Claire, flew in from Seattle for a week-long visit, bringing photos and memories from our childhood that David had always seemed disinterested in. "I never liked him," Claire admitted as we shared wine on my deck, overlooking the Pacific Ocean. "But I stopped saying anything because you seemed to pull away whenever I brought it up. He would make comments after your calls," I explained. "Nothing overtly critical, just implications that your life choices were questionable or that you were a negative influence." Claire shook her head sadly. "Classic isolation tactic. I'm just glad you're free now." 3 months after establishing the foundation, our first funded medical device entered clinical trials. The device, a neurostimulator for chronic pain management, had been Dr. Kim's project at Biotech Innovations. Before funding was cut, watching him present the device to the medical community, I felt a sense of purpose stronger than any I had experienced in my corporate career. That same week, I received news that my cardiac device had successfully completed its first human trial at Cardiotech. The surgeon who performed the procedure called personally to share the results. The patient's recovery time is already proving significantly shorter than with traditional methods. He reported excitedly, "Your design performed exactly as predicted." Knowing my innovation was already improving lives brought tears to my eyes. This was success, measured not in dollars, but in human impact, the metric that had always mattered most to me. As my professional life flourished, my personal life began to heal as well. I joined a women's hiking group in San Diego, made new friends who knew nothing of my past, and gradually opened myself to the possibility of new relationships. 8 months after moving to San Diego, I attended a medical technology conference as a keynote speaker. During the networking reception afterward, I was approached by a tall man with kind eyes and an intelligent expression. "Dr. Clark, I'm Daniel Martinez, cardiac surgeon at UC San Diego Health. Your device presentation was fascinating." We fell into easy conversation about medical innovations, patient outcomes, and the challenges of bringing new technologies to market. Unlike David, who had always steered conversations toward himself, Dr. Martinez asked thoughtful questions and listened attentively to my responses. "Would you be interested in continuing this discussion over dinner sometime?" he asked as the reception wound down. My immediate instinct was hesitation. Was I ready? Dr. Bennett had cautioned against rushing into new relationships before fully processing the previous one. "I should be transparent," I said. "I'm recently divorced and still finding my footing." Dr. Martinez nodded understandingly. "How about coffee instead? Professional colleagues sharing ideas. No pressure." His respect for my boundaries was refreshing. "Coffee sounds perfect." Our coffee meeting led to others, gradually evolving from professional discussions to more personal conversations. Daniel, unlike David, had no interest in controlling or diminishing me. He celebrated my successes without feeling threatened and shared his own without competition. 6 months into our friendship, during a walk along La Jolla Cove, Daniel asked if I was ready to consider something more than friendship. By then, I had learned to trust both him and, more importantly, my own judgment again. 1 year after leaving David, I was invited to speak at a Women in STEM conference in San Francisco, standing at the podium, looking out at hundreds of aspiring female scientists and engineers. I shared not just my professional journey, but the personal one as well. Success isn't measured by patents or dollars, I told the audience. It's measured by impact, on patients, on science, and on your own growth. Never let anyone convince you that your worth depends on their assessment. The most important validation comes from within. After the speech, a young engineer approached me, her expression earnest. "Your story gives me hope," she said. "I'm in a relationship where my ambitions are constantly minimized. Hearing how you rebuilt makes me believe I can too." Her words reminded me why sharing my experience mattered. My pain could serve as a lighthouse for others. Navigating similar storms, that evening, sitting on my deck, watching the sunset paint the Pacific in golden hues, I reflected on the journey of the past 18 months, from being called useless to founding a multi-million-dollar medical research foundation, from an emotionally abusive marriage to healthy, respectful relationships, from professional devastation to creating opportunities for others. The path had been painful, but necessary. Sometimes we need to be broken open to reach our fullest potential. David's cruelty had inadvertently freed me to become more authentically myself than I had been in our entire marriage. My phone chimed with a text from Daniel. "Proud of you today. Your speech will change lives. I smiled, typing back, "Thank you for seeing me." Because that was the fundamental difference. David had seen only what I could do for him, while Daniel saw me for who I truly was. The truth that had emerged months after my departure from my marriage wasn't just about David's betrayals or manipulations. The deeper truth was about my own resilience, my capacity to rebuild, and my ability to transform pain into purpose. We all have moments that define us, not the moments when others label us, but the moments when we decide whether to accept those labels or write our own story. My moment came when David called me useless, and I chose to prove, primarily to myself, that my worth was never his to determine. If you're listening to this and questioning your value because someone else has defined it for you, remember, you are the author of your own story. No one else gets to write your ending. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I'd love to hear about times when you've reclaimed your power in difficult situations. Leave a comment below, sharing your experience. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to support others hearing messages of hope and empowerment. Remember, sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as our biggest heartbreaks. I'm living proof that what breaks you can ultimately remake you stronger than before.